Can God change his mind? That question has haunted theologians, prophets, and ordinary people for thousands of years. It is not a comfortable question. It does not sit quietly in the back of the room. It pushes forward, uninvited, into every conversation about destiny, about judgment, about the fate of nations. And it always arrives at the worst possible moment, right when history seems to have already made up its mind, right when the ground beneath our feet has started to tremble, right when someone, somewhere, has made a decision that may have just set something irreversible into motion. Or has it? That is the question we are going to sit with tonight. Not rush past it. Not offer a cheap, comfortable answer that lets you go back to sleep. We are going to walk through it slowly, the way you walk through a room you've never entered before, careful, attentive, because the furniture is unfamiliar and the light is strange. What happens when a people is condemned? What happens when a verdict has been written, when the prophets have spoken, when the signs have aligned, and the silence of heaven begins to feel like confirmation? Is there a moment, is there a single, fragile, extraordinary moment, where something can still shift? Where the trajectory of consequence bends? Where God, who sees the end from the beginning, nevertheless pauses? Because here is the thing about prophecy that most people misunderstand. Prophecy is not a newspaper printed in advance. It is not a film with a fixed ending that you are simply waiting to watch. Prophecy is a conversation. A warning. A door. And the question that has always terrified those who study it seriously is this one, the one that hides inside all the others: is that door still open? And if it is, who among us would even think to walk through it? This is where we are now. This is the moment we are living in. And what we are about to explore may disturb you, not because it is dark, but because it is possible. Because it suggests that nothing is entirely settled. That the story is still being written. And that the decisions being made right now, in the halls of power and in the silence of ordinary lives, may matter far more than anyone is willing to say out loud. Stay with me. There is a principle that runs like a quiet river beneath all of Scripture, beneath all of prophetic literature, beneath every story of judgment and mercy that humanity has ever recorded. It is not loud. It does not announce itself with fanfare. But when you see it, you cannot unsee it. And it changes everything about how you read the signs of your time. The principle is this: God declares. And then he watches to see how the world responds. This is not a modern theological invention. This is woven into the oldest texts, the most foundational accounts of divine judgment. Think about what happened at Nineveh. Here was a city that had been condemned. Not gently warned, not diplomatically nudged, condemned. The prophet Jonah was sent not to negotiate, not to offer a program for reform, but to announce destruction. 40 days. That is all that was given. The sentence had been passed. The clock was running. And then something happened that the prophet himself could not accept, could not emotionally process, could not reconcile with his understanding of how justice was supposed to work. The city heard. The city turned. And the judgment did not come. Jonah sat outside the city in fury. He had delivered the message perfectly. He had done exactly what he was told. And still, somehow, the destruction he had proclaimed did not materialize. He felt like a false prophet in a city full of people who had just been handed the one thing they least deserved: more time. What do we make of that? What do we make of the fact that the same God who gave the decree also received the turning? That the same divine voice that said 40 days also said, in effect, I have seen your hearts, and the sentence is suspended? This is not a contradiction. This is a revelation. And it is one that should make every single person alive right now stop, look around at the world they are living in, and ask very seriously, where are we in this sequence? Because we are somewhere in it. We have always been somewhere in it. The question is whether we understand which part. Let us talk about the world as it is, because I do not want this to remain abstract. I do not want this to be a conversation that floats above the ground in beautiful language without ever landing. There are things happening right now, decisions being made right now, alignments forming right now, that people who study prophecy, geopolitics, and the deeper patterns of history are watching with the kind of attention that makes ordinary sleep very difficult. We live in a moment where the ancient geography of prophecy has become the living geography of the evening news. The regions that every serious student of biblical prophecy has been watching for decades, the Eastern Mediterranean, the Arabian Peninsula, the corridor between the Euphrates and the Jordan, the highlands of northern Syria, the contested waters of the Persian Gulf, these are no longer background settings in a theological textbook. They are breaking news. They are trending. They are the places where the decisions being made right now carry the kind of weight that echoes not just into the next election cycle or the next diplomatic summit, but into something much longer, much deeper, much harder to measure. And what kinds of decisions are we talking about? Decisions about land. Decisions about sovereignty. Decisions about which borders are legitimate and which ones are negotiable. Decisions about who has the right to call a certain piece of earth their home and who does not. Decisions about whether ancient covenants have any standing in a world that runs on international law and geopolitical calculation. Decisions about whether God's promises to a particular people in a particular place still carry binding force, or whether they have been superseded, revised, archived. These decisions are being made right now. In conference rooms and diplomatic cables and military briefings and parliamentary sessions. By people who may or may not understand, or care, that there is a dimension to what they are deciding that no satellite, no intelligence report, and no think tank analysis has been able to fully account for. And the reason this matters, the reason this is not simply political commentary dressed up in spiritual language, is that there is a pattern, documented across history, that suggests certain kinds of decisions about certain kinds of places carry consequences of a nature that ordinary political analysis cannot predict. Not because God is arbitrary. Not because history is magical. But because there is a covenant structure woven into the fabric of creation that responds to human choices in ways that feel, to those watching from the outside, like prophecy fulfilling itself in real time. And some of those decisions have just been made. I want to be careful here. I want to be precise. Because the temptation, when you are standing in a moment that feels historically significant, is to become certain too quickly. To point at a specific event, a specific agreement, a specific leader or political decision, and say, this is it. This is the thing that changes everything. This is the tripwire. This is the fulfillment. That kind of certainty has been the undoing of many a prophetic voice throughout history. People who were sincere, who were watching, who were genuinely seeing real patterns, but who moved from observation to declaration faster than the evidence warranted. And history corrected them, not always gently. So I am not going to tell you that a specific decision made in a specific place on a specific date is the event that has altered the prophetic trajectory of our time. What I am going to suggest, and this is something I believe you should sit with rather than simply accept, is that the category of decision being made right now is the kind of category that has historically mattered. That the type of alignment we are witnessing, the geopolitical convergence, the realignment of regional powers, the specific questions about specific territories that are suddenly back at the center of global conversation, is the type of alignment that students of prophetic literature have been describing for a very long time. And the question that emerges from that observation is not, is this the fulfillment? The question is, are we in the sequence? And if we are in the sequence, where exactly are we? Are we at the beginning, where there is still significant room for decisions to alter the trajectory? Are we in the middle, where things are moving and the momentum has built but the outcome is still uncertain? Or are we closer to the end of a specific chapter than most people realize, at the point where the decisions that mattered most were the ones made in the recent past, and what we are watching now is largely consequence? I genuinely do not know. And I think anyone who claims to know with certainty is overreaching. But what I do know, what every serious student of these patterns knows, is that this question matters. That the answer to this question has practical implications. That it is not merely academic. Because if there is still room for decisions to matter, then what we do, how we respond, what we choose to do with the information we have, is not irrelevant. And this is where the spiritual dimension becomes urgent in a way that goes beyond the merely interesting. There is something that the prophetic tradition calls intercession. And I suspect that word means very different things to very different people, so let me be specific about how I am using it here. Intercession is not petition in the ordinary sense. It is not a wish list sent upward. It is not the spiritual equivalent of a complaint form. In its deepest, most ancient, most theologically serious form, intercession is the act of standing between a declared consequence and those who are about to experience it. It is the act of inserting human response, genuine, costly, aligned with heaven human response, into the space between judgment and execution. It is the act of saying, on behalf of those who may not be saying it themselves, we have seen. We understand. We turn. And the record of the ancient text suggests that this act, when it is genuine, when it is not performance but transformation, can actually do something. Can actually move something. Can actually introduce a variable into the equation that was not previously present. Abraham stood at the edge of Sodom and negotiated. That is the word the text uses. Negotiated. Not passively accepted the announced outcome, but engaged with it, asked questions about it, probed the logic of it, and received genuine responses. He was not told to be quiet and accept the divine decision. He was received. He was heard. And had there been 10 righteous people in that city, 10, the record suggests it would not have fallen. Moses, standing between God and a people who had just committed what may have been the defining act of national apostasy, did not step aside and let the declared consequence run its course. He stepped into the gap. He interceded. And the text says that God relented. That the thing that had been declared did not happen in the way it had been declared. That something in the act of human response, faithful, pleading, selfless human response, introduced a change. Now, I want you to think about what that means for right now. Because if the record of the ancient texts consistently shows that certain categories of catastrophic outcome have been modified, delayed, or averted through the response of even a small number of people who understood what was happening and chose to act on that understanding, then the question of whether there is still time to respond is not merely theological. It is urgent. It is practical. It is the most important question being asked right now, whether people know they are asking it or not. And this is what the work that we do here at the Prophetic Report keeps returning to, again and again, not as a comfortable habit or a predictable format, but because the evidence keeps pointing back to it. The people who understand the moment they are living in, who can read the convergence of events with both prophetic literacy and genuine sobriety, have a responsibility that goes beyond simply watching. They have a responsibility to respond. To intercede. To stand in the gap, even when the gap feels impossibly narrow. Let me take you somewhere specific for a moment. Not because I want to overemphasize a single event or a single region, but because the abstract becomes real when it is grounded in something concrete. Over the past several years, there has been a series of agreements, negotiations, and realignments in the Middle East that have been unprecedented in their scope and their speed. Relationships that were thought to be permanently hostile have been normalized. Countries that swore they would never deal with each other are dealing with each other. Alliances that seemed fixed are shifting. And the specific geography at the center of all of this, the land that every major prophetic tradition treats as uniquely significant, the territory that is referenced more specifically in prophetic literature than any other place on earth, remains at the center of every one of these conversations. And now, overlapping with these diplomatic and political shifts, there are military realities on the ground that are changing the picture in ways that affect the prophetic timeline that many have been tracking. The question that serious observers are asking is not whether these developments are significant. They clearly are. The question is what they mean. Are they steps toward a genuine peace, a stability that opens a new chapter? Or are they the kind of surface-level agreements that the prophetic tradition repeatedly warns about, peace spoken when there is not yet peace, stability built on a foundation that has not yet been tested by what is coming? And inside that question, inside the uncertainty of interpretation, is where the human decision, the human response, the human act of seeking to understand and then to act rightly, becomes so important. Because the interpretation you hold will shape the response you make. And the response you make, individually and collectively, may be more consequential than you currently understand. I want to say that plainly. Not to frighten. Not to inflate the sense of importance of any single person's action. But because I think the prophetic record consistently suggests that the difference between certain outcomes and other outcomes has, at key moments, been the presence or absence of people who understood what was happening and responded accordingly. Let us go deeper into this question of whether a people, once condemned, can be turned from that condemnation. Because it is the most emotionally charged part of this conversation, and it is the part that most people, when they are truly honest with themselves, find the most destabilizing. There is a part of us that wants condemnation to be permanent. That wants judgment, once declared, to be irreversible. Not because we are cruel, but because permanence is easier to live with than uncertainty. If it is already decided, then there is nothing left to do. The weight of responsibility lifts. The urgency dissolves. We become spectators at a drama whose ending has already been written. But what if it has not? What if the declaration of judgment is, in many cases, not a fixed sentence but a door open to reveal what is inside? A test of response, not a notification of predetermined outcome? What if the purpose of prophetic warning, the function of the voice that says the ground is about to shift, is precisely to create the possibility of a response that alters what would otherwise unfold? There is a verse in the book of Jeremiah, one of the most theologically rich and emotionally raw books in the entire prophetic canon, where God speaks to the prophet in terms that should stop everyone who reads them cold. He says something extraordinary. He says that there are times when he declares against a nation, judgment, destruction, ruin, and if that nation turns from its evil, he will relent of the disaster he intended to bring. And there are times when he declares for a nation, blessing, restoration, peace, and if that nation does evil in his sight, he will relent of the good he said he would do. Read that slowly. Because it is doing something very unusual. It is describing a God who is not mechanically executing a pre-written script. It is describing a God who is genuinely responsive to human choice. Who built into the structure of prophetic declaration a two-directional sensitivity. Who is watching not just to see whether the signs align but to see whether the people, the nation, the individual, respond. This is not a God who set the universe running like a clock and then stepped back to watch it tick. This is a God who is engaged. Who is present. Who reads the turning of hearts the way a musician reads a room, sensing the atmosphere, feeling the response, adjusting the performance not because the music has been written badly but because the performance is, by nature, relational. And if that is true, if the God we are talking about is genuinely, actively, responsively present in the unfolding of history, then the question of whether something that has been declared can still be changed is not a question about whether God can be pressured or manipulated. It is a question about whether human response matters. Whether it counts. Whether the choices being made right now, in this specific window of history, have any real bearing on what comes next. And I believe, with everything I know about this tradition, everything I have studied, everything the evidence of the ancient record suggests, that they do. That human choices matter enormously. That the space between declared judgment and experienced consequence is not a waiting room where we sit passively until the verdict is executed. It is a workshop. A place of transformation. A place where the story can still go differently. Now let me bring something forward that I think is often missing from these kinds of conversations, something that keeps them from landing where they need to land. When we talk about the possibility of change, about intercession, about turning, there is a temptation to keep it abstract. To speak in terms of a nation, a people, a civilization, a trajectory. These are real things, and they matter. But the way they change is always through the accumulation of individual choices. There is no national turning that does not begin with a person. There is no collective repentance that does not start with a single human being who woke up in the night and said, "Something is wrong. Something needs to change. And I am going to respond." This is the part of the prophetic tradition that gets edited out of most popular presentations because it is uncomfortable and because it places responsibility in exactly the place we most want to avoid, on ourselves. Not on the leaders. Not on the nation. Not on the geopolitical forces beyond our control. On us. On me. On the person reading these words or listening to this voice right now. Because the question of whether the trajectory can change is not separable from the question of whether we are willing to be part of the change. And being part of the change is not primarily about political action, though it may include that. It is not primarily about protest or advocacy, though those things have their place. It is about something more fundamental, more demanding, more quiet, and more real than any of those things. It is about whether we, individually, have genuinely aligned ourselves with the reality that the prophetic tradition describes. Whether we have actually understood what is at stake, not just intellectually, not just as an interesting subject for content and analysis, but in the deepest, most personal, most costly sense. Whether we have actually taken the weight of this moment into our inner life and allowed it to do what it needs to do there. Because the intercessors who changed outcomes in the record of the ancient texts were not people who understood the situation and responded from a comfortable distance. They were people who took the situation personally. Who felt it. Who allowed the weight of it to land on them and then, from under that weight, chose to respond. Abraham arguing with God about Sodom was not performing a theological exercise. He was in agony. He was bargaining because the alternative was unbearable to him. Moses throwing himself before God after the incident with the golden calf was not going through a ritual. He was offering himself. He said, "If you will not forgive them, blot my name out of your book." That is not performance. That is someone who has taken the weight of the moment and is refusing to step back from it. And what that kind of response does, what it opens up in the space between judgment and consequence, is something that we cannot fully map or predict. But the record suggests it opens something real. I want to talk now about a particular danger that I think is especially present in our moment, in the world we are navigating, with the tools and platforms and information environments that shape how we understand everything. The danger is this: mistaking observation for participation. There are more people today than at any previous moment in history who are aware of the prophetic dimension of current events. Who are tracking the geopolitical developments. Who are reading the signs. Who are watching the convergence. Who are consuming content, following analysts, listening to podcasts, and absorbing enormous amounts of information about what is happening in the world and what it might mean from a prophetic perspective. And there is genuine value in all of that. Understanding the moment you are living in matters. Prophetic literacy is not a luxury. It is a responsibility. But awareness is not response. Observation is not participation. Knowing the diagnosis is not the same as receiving the treatment. And I have watched, over years of this work, the emergence of a kind of prophetic spectatorship that is, I think, one of the more subtle forms of failure available to the people of this generation. It looks like engagement. It feels like awareness. It produces the sensation of being informed and alert and switched on to what is happening. But it lacks the one thing that actually matters, a genuine, personal, transformative response to what is being observed. You can watch every analysis of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict through a prophetic lens, listen to every breakdown of the Abraham Accords and what they might portend, follow every development in the Turkish-Iranian rivalry or the resurgence of Russian influence in the Middle East, track every sign of the prophetic alignment that so many observers are noting right now, and still be completely, entirely, catastrophically passive in the face of the moment you are living in. This is not an accusation. It is an observation. And it is an observation I apply first to myself, because the temptation to observe without responding is not external. It lives inside the work. It lives inside the study. It is always there, offering the comfortable illusion that understanding is equivalent to acting. The prophets of the ancient tradition were not analysts. They were voices. They were not content creators, they were people whose lives had been interrupted by something they could not ignore and could not contain, who stood in the most uncomfortable possible places and said the most uncomfortable possible things, not because it was professionally advantageous but because the alternative, silence, felt like a form of complicity. And I think, in our moment, that model of prophetic engagement, urgent, personal, costly, non-spectacular, deeply sincere, is what the situation actually calls for. Not more analysis. More response. Let me circle back now to the question we began with, because I want to hold it in a different light. Can God change his mind? I want to suggest that this question, as commonly asked, is pointing at the wrong thing. It is framed in a way that makes God the variable and human choice the constant. It asks, given our behavior, given what we are doing, given the decisions that have been made, will God respond differently than he said he would? But I think the deeper question, the one that actually matters more, is this: can we change our minds? Because the record consistently suggests that divine responses to human situations are not arbitrary or capricious or disconnected from what human beings are actually doing and being. They are responsive. They read the room, if I can use that phrase with appropriate reverence. They sense the turning, or the absence of turning. They receive the genuine cry, or they receive the silence. And what shifts outcomes, not always, not automatically, not as a formula that can be gamed, is not God's willingness to be different but humanity's willingness to be different. The capacity to look at what we have become, what we have chosen, what we have normalized, what we have decided, and to say, with the weight of genuine conviction rather than strategic calculation, this is not what we want to be. This is not the direction we want to go. We are turning. That turning, when it is real, when it is not a public relations exercise but an actual reorientation of collective will, has historically done something in the space between judgment and consequence. Has opened something. Has introduced a variable that was not in the original calculation. Has, in some cases that the record takes seriously enough to preserve and transmit across thousands of years, changed the outcome. Now. Look at the world right now. Look at the decisions that have just been made. Look at the alignments that are forming, the fractures that are deepening, the conflicts that are smoldering or erupting, the ancient promises that are being either honored or violated depending on who is telling the story. And ask yourself, where is the turning? Where is the genuine response? Where is the authentic, costly, non-performative reorientation that would introduce a new variable into what is unfolding? Is it happening somewhere? Certainly. It is always happening somewhere, in communities too small to make the news and in lives too ordinary to attract attention. People who have understood the moment they are living in and have chosen, quietly and daily, to align themselves with something greater than the drift of their culture. People who are interceding. People who are turning. But is it happening in sufficient measure? Is the weight of genuine response matching the weight of what is unfolding? I genuinely do not know. I do not think anyone does. But the question matters. It matters urgently. And it is a question that each of us has to answer not with analysis but with our lives. There is something else I want to bring into this conversation, something that gets very little attention in the typical prophetic content that circulates right now, and that I think represents one of the more significant gaps in how these conversations are conducted. It is the question of what a people condemned actually looks like from the inside. Because condemnation, in the prophetic literature, is rarely experienced by those inside it as condemnation. It is experienced as normalcy. As the ordinary operation of life, business, politics, culture. The people of Jerusalem in the years before the Babylonian siege were not walking around with the awareness that they were living in the terminal phase of a condemned society. They were going to the market. They were fighting about politics. They were debating theology. They were conducting their religious rituals with great sincerity, holding festivals, making offerings, maintaining the forms of faithfulness while the substance had long since eroded. Jeremiah tried to tell them. He told them for decades. And the response he received was not engagement with the substance of what he was saying. The response was, "Why are you making us so uncomfortable? Why are you disturbing the peace? Are you the only one who knows what is happening? All the other prophets are saying it will be fine. Why are you so insistent on catastrophe?" And Jeremiah did not have a satisfying answer to those questions. He had no proof that could not be disputed. He had no evidence that could not be explained away by the optimists. He had only the unbearable weight of what he had seen and heard in a dimension that his contemporaries had largely closed themselves off from. That weight eventually broke him, at least temporarily. He wrote what may be the most honest piece of prophetic self-expression in the entire canon, what scholars call his Confessions, where he essentially cried out to God that this was too much, that the word he had been given was both irresistible and destructive, that he could not stop speaking it but that speaking it was costing him everything. That is what genuine prophetic engagement looks like. Not triumph. Not being right. Not the satisfaction of watching what you predicted come to pass. It looks like being torn. It looks like wishing you were wrong. It looks like continuing to speak the uncomfortable thing even when the comfortable voices are more popular, more invited, more welcomed. And it looks like continuing to hope. Continuing to believe that even in the late stages, even when the signs are advanced and the momentum has built, something can still respond to a genuine turning. That the door, though narrowing, has not yet closed. I want to talk about the nations. Because the prophetic tradition does not only address individuals. It addresses collectives. Kingdoms. Empires. Nations as conscious, identifiable agents in the drama of history, capable of choices that carry collective consequences. And the pattern, when you look at it across the sweep of the ancient record, is striking. Nations that held certain kinds of covenanted responsibilities, not because they were morally superior but because of specific historical and spiritual commitments they had entered into, or that had been entered into on their behalf, were held to a higher account than nations that had no such commitments. The expectations placed on them were greater. The consequences of betraying those expectations were correspondingly more severe. This is not a comfortable principle. It runs directly against the grain of the modern democratic intuition that all nations are essentially equivalent, that no people has a unique destiny or a unique accountability, that the only values that matter in international affairs are universal ones that apply equally to everyone. But the prophetic tradition insists otherwise. It insists that covenantal identity, the specific, historical, particular commitments that certain peoples have made or received, creates a kind of moral and spiritual debt structure that does not dissolve when it becomes inconvenient, does not evaporate when the political winds shift, does not become optional simply because the culture has moved on. And when that debt is ignored, when those covenantal commitments are abandoned or redefined in ways that suit current convenience rather than original meaning, the prophetic tradition is remarkably consistent about what tends to follow. Not immediately. Not always obviously. But with a pattern that, once you see it in the historical record, you cannot unsee. Now look at the nations making the decisions we have been discussing. Look at the specific commitments they have made and the specific ways they are navigating, or not navigating, those commitments right now. Look at the alliances being formed and the ones being abandoned. Look at the specific territories whose status is being redefined, and who is doing the redefining. And ask yourself, is this the behavior of nations that understand what they have covenanted to? Or is this the behavior of nations that have decided the covenant no longer applies? Because the prophetic record has a very clear view on what happens next in each of those cases. And neither answer leads somewhere comfortable. The difference is in the nature and the trajectory of what follows. I need to address something directly here, because I suspect it is in the back of many minds as you listen to this. Someone is asking, but haven't these warnings been given before? Haven't people at every moment of historical crisis been sure that they were living in the decisive hour, the pivot point, the moment when everything was about to change? And haven't those predictions, more often than not, proven to be either wrong or at least premature? Yes. That is true. The history of prophetic expectation is filled with moments of intense anticipation that did not resolve in the way that those anticipating them expected. People who were watching carefully and sincerely and intelligently were nonetheless wrong about the timing, wrong about the specific form, wrong about which event was the trigger and which was just a precursor. And that history should make us humble. Should make us careful. Should prevent us from the kind of overconfident specificity that has embarrassed and discredited genuinely serious prophetic voices throughout history. But here is what that history does not tell us. It does not tell us that the patterns are not real. It does not tell us that the convergence of signs is meaningless. It does not tell us that the alignment of prophecy and geopolitics is coincidental. All it tells us is that the human capacity to precisely time and specifically identify the fulfillment of prophetic patterns is consistently more limited than the humans attempting to do so believe it is. The signs can be real and the timing can still be wrong. The direction can be clear and the specific destination can still be obscured. The season can be identifiable and the specific day can still be unknown. And this is actually, I think, one of the most important practical insights you can take from this conversation. The uncertainty about timing is not an excuse for inaction. If anything, it is an argument for urgency. Because if you do not know exactly when the window closes, the wise response is not to wait for more certainty before deciding to respond. The wise response is to respond now, as if the window is narrower than you think, because it may well be. This is what the tradition of watchfulness is actually about. It is not about being correct in your predictions. It is about being alert, responsive, and engaged in a moment that you have correctly identified as significant, even if the precise shape of its significance remains unclear. We have been talking at a high level for a long time, and I want to come back down to earth for a moment. Back to the specific texture of the present. Because there are decisions being made right now, today, this week, in this month, in this year, that the people who are making them largely do not understand the full weight of. They understand the geopolitical weight. They understand the military weight. Some of them understand the historical weight. Very few of them understand the prophetic weight. And the prophetic weight is this: certain territories, certain covenants, certain people, certain commitments that were made in the ancient past and have not been formally revoked, carry a kind of spiritual gravity that bends the moral arc of history around them. They are not ordinary. They cannot be treated as ordinary without consequences that ordinary political science cannot fully account for. When powerful nations decide to divide what was promised undivided, there is something in the structure of the covenant that responds. When diplomatic agreements trade ancient covenantal land for security guarantees that subsequent events prove illusory, there is a feedback in the prophetic architecture of history that does not simply absorb that transaction without registering it. This is not mysticism. This is pattern recognition applied to a very large dataset across a very long time frame. And what the pattern consistently shows is that those who act in ways that contradict the specific stipulations of covenants they have not formally renounced face consequences that operate on a timeline and at a scale that catches them by surprise. Now, this does not mean that every decision made in the Middle East is automatically catastrophic. It does not mean that no negotiation, no compromise, no diplomatic engagement is possible or appropriate. It means that the specific nature of certain commitments, and the specific question of how certain covenants are being treated, matters in a way that goes beyond the purely political. And the decisions being made right now, the ones that are generating attention from analysts at places like the Prophetic Report who are tracking these patterns closely, are exactly the kind of decisions that this framework treats as significant. Not necessarily final. Not necessarily irreversible. But significant. Consequential. The kind of decisions that introduce new variables into the prophetic equation, that shift the position on the timeline, that open or close certain windows. Let me ask you something personal now. Something that I think matters more than any of the analysis we have been walking through. What are you doing with what you know? Because you are not reading this or listening to this without some existing understanding of the prophetic dimension of current events. You would not have come this far into this conversation if you had no prior interest in these questions, no prior engagement with this framework, no prior sense that something significant is unfolding in the world right now and that it has dimensions that most people are missing. So what are you doing with that? What does your awareness of the prophetic weight of this moment produce in your actual life? Is it producing information consumption? More reading, more watching, more analyzing. That has its place. Understanding matters. Is it producing anxiety? A low-level background dread about what is coming, a sense that things are moving towards something dark and that nothing can stop it. That is a natural response to certain prophetic realities, but it is not the intended response. The intended response to prophetic warning is not despair. It is action. Is it producing prayer? Not as a last resort or a background habit but as a genuine, serious, engaged act of intercession. The kind that is willing to persist even when nothing visible seems to change. The kind that understands itself to be participating in something, rather than simply reporting for duty. Is it producing a change in how you live? A recalibration of priorities? A greater seriousness about what you are doing with your days, your relationships, your resources, your voice? Because the prophetic tradition, at its core, is not primarily about information. It is about transformation. The purpose of the prophetic word is not to leave you better informed and unchanged. It is to introduce a crisis, in the best sense of the word, the Greek word that means a turning point, a moment of decision, a fork in the road. It is to force a choice. To create a moment where you cannot stay where you are. Where the information you have received demands a response. And the response that has historically mattered, the one that has introduced new variables into what would otherwise have been fixed outcomes, is not the one that comes from people who understood the situation and maintained their equilibrium. It is the one that comes from people who understood the situation and were changed by that understanding. People who allowed the weight of what they knew to land on them and to do something to them. Are you one of those people? Is the knowledge you carry changing you? Or has it settled into a kind of sophisticated awareness that leaves you fundamentally where you were before you had it? That question is not comfortable. I know. It is not comfortable for me either. But it is the question that this moment is actually asking. And I think we owe it honesty. There is a story that is not often told in prophetic circles, partly because it is ambiguous, partly because it does not resolve neatly, and partly because its protagonist is not the kind of hero that prophetic narrative usually celebrates. It is the story of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a king, one of the more faithfully attentive kings in the record of his line. And at a certain point in his reign, he received a prophetic message that was about as final as prophetic messages get. It was not a warning. It was not an invitation to turn. It was a declaration. You are going to die. Not eventually. Now. Put your house in order. And Hezekiah did something that I find extraordinary, not because it was clever or because it worked in the way he intended, but because of what it reveals about how the prophetic tradition itself understands the relationship between declared outcomes and human response. He did not accept the declaration. He turned his face to the wall and wept and prayed. He reminded God of his faithfulness, not as a bargaining chip, not as a transaction, but as a genuine, personal, heartbroken cry from someone who was not ready to let this be the end. And the prophet who had just delivered the death sentence was on his way out of the palace when the word came back to him, turn around. Go back. Tell him 15 more years. Now, there is a whole separate story inside that extension, about what Hezekiah did with those 15 years and whether the extension was ultimately wise, about the son who was born in those extra years and the direction he took the kingdom. The prophetic record is not uncritical of the extension. It carries its own complications. But what strikes me about this story is the mechanism. The declared outcome was altered not by a political calculation, not by a military victory, not by a diplomatic achievement, but by a person who turned toward God in genuine, unperformed, unself-conscious anguish and said, I am not ready. Please. Not yet. And the response, direct, personal, specific, was not a general principle but a particular intervention. A new word given to the same prophet who had just delivered the original one. What does that mean for where we are right now? It means, at minimum, that declared outcomes are not automatically executed regardless of what happens between the declaration and the moment of execution. It means that there is a space, a real space, a space that the tradition takes seriously as a place where human response matters, between what has been said and what comes to pass. It means that the people who know they are living inside a prophetic moment have not exhausted their options simply by noting that the moment is serious. And it means that the turning, the genuine, personal, vulnerable, non-spectacular turning, is always worth doing. Not as a strategy. Not as a technique. But as the most fundamental expression of who we understand ourselves to be in relationship to the God whose voice we say we are trying to hear. I want to talk now about something that I think represents one of the most profound and least discussed aspects of prophetic timing. Something that operates below the level of geopolitical analysis, below the level of sign tracking and pattern recognition, at a level that is simultaneously more intimate and more determinative than any of that. It is the question of why prophetic fulfillment seems to wait. Because if you study the patterns carefully, you notice something curious. There are prophetic declarations that are clearly aligned with the circumstances of a specific historical moment, that have everything they need in terms of geopolitical, military, and spiritual setup to fulfill, and then, for reasons that are not immediately obvious, they do not. The moment passes. The alignment shifts. The players change. The window appears to close. And then, sometimes centuries later, sometimes millennia later, the pattern re-establishes. New players, new geopolitics, new moment, same underlying prophetic structure. And the question is, what was happening in the intervening period? Was the prophecy simply waiting for a new arrangement of pieces on the board? Or was something else happening? I want to suggest, carefully and without claiming more certainty than I have, that one of the things that sometimes causes prophetic fulfillment to wait is the incomplete nature of the response it is meant to produce. That some prophetic patterns are waiting not primarily for geopolitical conditions to align but for a people to reach a depth of understanding, a quality of response, a degree of genuine transformation that will make the experience of what is coming meaningful rather than merely catastrophic. In other words, the delay, in some cases, is a mercy. It is the period in which the thing that needs to be understood can be understood, in which the turning that needs to happen can happen, in which the people who need to be formed by this moment can be formed. And the corollary of that, the part that adds urgency rather than comfort, is that when the formation is complete, when the window of transformation has been fully offered and used or refused, the thing that was waiting can no longer wait. The delay ends. The fulfillment proceeds. I do not know where we are in that sequence. I do not think anyone does, with certainty. But I do think the question of whether we are using the time we have, whether the delay, if that is what we are currently in, is being used for the formation it was offered to enable, is one of the most important questions available to us right now. And the only honest answer to that question is not an analysis of geopolitics. It is a look at your own interior. At what you are becoming. At whether the prophetic weight of this moment is producing in you what it was designed to produce. We are approaching the end of what I want to say tonight, but I want to leave you with something that I hope will stay with you longer than an argument or an analysis would. There is an image from the prophetic literature that I return to again and again, not because it is dramatic or because it is the most famous image in the canon, but because it captures something about this moment that I think nothing else captures quite as precisely. It is the image of the watchman on the wall. The watchman's role in the ancient world was simple, but the responsibility it carried was absolute. He stood at the highest point of the city. He watched the approaches, the roads that led toward the city from every direction. He was trained to recognize the signs of what was coming before it arrived, the dust cloud that meant an army, the smoke on the horizon that meant a fire, the movement in the distant fields that meant a threat. His responsibility was not to decide what to do about what he saw. It was not to be the military commander or the king or the diplomat. His responsibility was to see, and to communicate what he saw, and to do it accurately and urgently, without either exaggeration or minimization. To be a faithful transmitter of reality. And the prophetic tradition makes the watchman's accountability explicit in a way that is sobering. If the watchman saw the threat coming and did not call out the warning, the blood of those who were then caught unprepared was on his hands. But if the watchman called the warning and the people chose not to respond, the watchman was clear. The accountability had been transferred to those who heard and chose not to act. This is the framework within which this entire conversation exists. This is what places like the Prophetic Report are attempting to do, not perfectly, not without error, not with the kind of certainty that history rarely justifies, but seriously, carefully, faithfully. To be a voice on the wall that calls what it sees, that names what is converging, that identifies the category of moment we are in so that those who hear have the opportunity to respond rather than being caught by surprise. And the response belongs to you. To us. Individually, personally, non-delegably. Not to the nation. Not to the leaders. Not to the prophets or the analysts or the commentators. To the person who heard the warning. What do you do with what you have heard? I want to leave this question in the air, not to create anxiety, but because I think it deserves the space of genuine reflection rather than a quick resolution. The decision that gave this conversation its title, the one that some are saying could change the prophetic trajectory of this moment, has been made. It is in the world. It is producing effects. Whatever it means, whatever it portends, it has been entered into the record. But here is what I want you to hold as you carry this conversation with you. It is possible that the decision is not the final word. It is possible that the response to the decision matters more than the decision itself. It is possible that in the space between what was just decided and what ultimately unfolds, there is still room for something to be introduced that was not previously present. A turning. A response. A genuine, collective reorientation toward the things that actually determine the trajectory of nations and of history. It is possible that this is not over. That the most important moment is not the one that just passed but the one we are in right now. That the question of what comes next is still, at least in part, an open one. That the human choices being made in the next period of time, not in the halls of geopolitical power, but in the interior lives of ordinary people who have understood what this moment is, still matter. I believe they do. Not because I am optimistic by temperament or because I find comfort in ambiguity. But because the record, the long, complicated, painful, beautiful record of how God has engaged with human history, consistently suggests that the story is not finished until the turning has been fully offered and the response, whatever it is, has been given. We are somewhere in that sequence. I do not know exactly where. But I believe we are in a place where the response we give in the coming days and weeks and months still counts. Still registers. Still matters to something beyond the merely political and the merely historical. And that is both a comfort and a weight. It is a comfort because it means we are not simply spectators. We are not passive witnesses to a script being executed over our heads. We have a part to play. Our response is being read. And it is a weight because that means we cannot afford the luxury of indifference. We cannot afford the comfort of detachment. We cannot afford to understand the moment and do nothing with that understanding. The watchman has called. The question on the wall now is not what is coming. The question is, what will we do with having been told? That question is yours to answer. And the answer matters more than you may yet realize. The prophetic report, for those who are watching, waiting, and willing to respond.